Hello everyone, glad to be back. Today is 7th of July, now it's almost 11 o'clock in the morning Moscow time. I'm Levan Gudadze and this is my first update today, in which I will share all the main news that are making headlines in Russian media outlets and Russian language pages on different internet platforms. There are quite a few very significant developments and the news that I like to share with you for this moment. And of course, I will start with Ukraine and special military operation. But first of all, today is Friday, so I wish you a great day and wonderful upcoming weekend. And because it's Friday, I will try to make this update a little bit short, as much short as I can. So yes, let's see if I will manage it. So first of all, quick summary of the situation on the front line. When it comes to Kherson region, mainly it's artillery duels between the sides. During the previous weeks, Zelensky's regime did try to establish more or less significant bridgehead on the left bank. They did succeed for a couple of days, but then Russian forces conduct counteroffensive operations in this area, especially in area of Aleshki, right next to destroyed Antonovsky Bridge. And according to latest news, some Ukrainian units probably still are on the left bank, dispersed all along the left bank. But when it comes to bridgehead, Zelensky's regime basically failed. They did not manage to establish significant foothold on the left bank. But yet again, I believe in foreseeable future, in a few weeks' time, Zelensky's regime probably will try to conduct mass crossing of the Dnieper, and that will happen when second wave of Ukrainian counteroffensive will begin on this land bridge in between Crimea and mainland Russia, on Zaporozhye and South Donetsk sectors of the front. But right now, situation in Kherson region did return to its previous stage, when it was mainly artillery duels between the sides and recon operations. When it comes to Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, it's quite here calm situation, which is good. There are some reports that Zaporozhye nuclear power plant has been reconnected with the high power line, power voltage line, which is good news. I did not see confirmation of this news on Russian sources, but Ukrainian side did report that they did reconnected Zaporozhye nuclear power plant with one of the power supply lines, which is good because even though ZMPP do have reserve lines of energy supply to make sure that all the systems, including cooling system, is working properly, more lines of electricity, the better. Overall situation is calm, but still it is high risk. That risk is remaining that Zelensky's regime will try to conduct some provocation in direction of ZMPP before NATO summit will take place in Vilnius in next 4 to 5 days. Let's hope nothing will happen, but I think risk is still there. When it comes to Zaporozhye sector of the front, previous 12 to 24 hours, Zelensky's regime was quite active in direction of Pitykhadki and Zhiribyanki. Ukrainian forces were trying to improve their positions in this area, but all the attempts, all the local scale offensive operations of Ukrainian forces were repelled by Russian side. And according to news that we are getting, Ukrainian grouping of forces in this area lost about battalion during that clashes, which is quite significant, because overall situation is when we are characterizing overall situation on this sector of the front, it's operational pause. And when Ukrainian side during the operational pause is losing almost a battalion with manpower and the military equipment, that's quite significant setback. And there was quite some kind of activity in Rabotina direction. Ukrainian forces are trying to improve their positions in this direction, but they are not really managing to achieve any more or less significant success. And by the way, I will remind you, if I may, that these areas are not even on the first line of defense of Russian forces. It's just line of contact, and the Russian side is managing to hold on to repel Ukrainian offensive operations with just the strongholds. Because the first line of defense of Russian forces are a few kilometers away from that area. And it's also kind of calm situation, if we can use this word in about line of contact, but in comparison to previous weeks, it's calm situation in direction of this bridgehead between Ugledar and Gulyai-Pole. Ukrainian forces still are trying to at least improve their positions, but they are very much unsuccessful, and it's artillery duels now between the sides. And as you know, and I did report previously about it, because of extreme effectiveness of Russian frontline aviation, especially helicopter gunships, we do see more and more instances when Zelensky's regime is sending its forces in offensive without cover of armored vehicles. So that's once again highlights overall situation on Ukrainian side. When it comes to, and by the way, to summarize these sectors of the front, Zaporozhye and South Donetsk directions, it's an operational pause, and as I said quite a few times before, I believe this operational pause will continue at least for 2 or 3 weeks. And then probably we will see activization of Ukrainian forces. We probably will see second wave of counteroffensive, not just in this sector of the front, but also in Kherson region, because I'm quite sure Ukrainian forces will probably try to conduct mass crossing of the Dnieper simultaneously with this second wave of offensive. But yet again, I'm not military expert, so my reading of big picture can be mistaken. Let's continue. And when it comes to Donetsk direction, it's traditionally 2 main areas that are hot points. It's Marinka, where according to latest news, Russian forces did manage to improve their positions a little bit, but yet again we are talking about local scale. And of course Avdiivka is also hot point, and recently last 12 to 24 hours Russian forces did become a little bit more active again, and now some rumors are circulating in Russian segment of internet that maybe Russian forces are preparing ground for more or less large-scale offensive operations in this area to encircle Avdiivka, or maybe even enter Avdiivka itself and establish control over this small town. But yet again, initiative in this area is in Russian hands, I believe. When it comes to Artyomovsk or Bakhmut directions, it's quite confusing situation, because on the southern flank of Bakhmut, it's Ukrainian forces that are trying to achieve something during the previous week also, but on the northern flank of Bakhmut, it's Russian forces that are conducting some local scale offensive operations. When it comes to south side, it's Kurdyumovka and Klishchevka that are hot points. And by the way, this map is unreliable. According to this map, these settlements are under Ukrainian control, but this is total nonsense. These settlements are under full Russian control, and more than that, during the previous 24 hours, Russian forces did manage not just to repel all attempts from Ukrainian forces to move forward or conduct offensive operations, but Russian forces begin their offensive, and according to latest news, Russian side did manage to re-establish control over all the strongholds in vicinity of Klishchevka that was lost during the previous days of fighting. When it comes to Bakhmut, in Bakhmut itself, it's quiet. But on the northern flank of Bakhmut, during the previous 12 to 24 hours, it's Russian side that was significantly active. And the latest news is that Russian forces not just managed to repel all that attempts from Ukrainian forces to conduct offensive in direction of Yakhidna and Berkhovka, but according to latest news, Russian forces did move forward, conducted their own offensive operations, and as I said, according to latest news, Berkhovka water reservoir, now area of Berkhovka water reservoir, is under Russian partially full, partially operational control, because it's quite a vast area, really. When we are talking about local scale, of course. So as I said, in the southern side, it's Ukrainian forces that are more active, even though they are losing initiative. It's clear to me that they are using initiative, and probably in coming days, the Russian side will become much more active in southern flank of Bakhmut. But in northern flank, it's already Russian forces are more active, which definitely indicates that Ukrainian forces in this area just run out of steam, run out of military equipment, manpower, and without additional reinforcements, they are just unable to continue offensive operations. And when it comes to Solidar sector, it's significantly calmer now situation that it was in previous weeks. Sides are exchanging with artillery fire and just local attempts to little bit improve their positions. Seversk direction, it's usual stuff. Belogorovka is a hot point still, and there are some reports that Russian side did manage to yet again improve their positions a little bit, but I believe before Russian forces will conduct large-scale offensive operation in direction of Yampol Liman, Belogorovka will still remain contested between the sides. And I believe we will see significant activization of Russian forces in direction of Liman, because we do have quite a few indicators that possibly, that's my informed guess, if I may say this way, this is just my prediction, that I believe Russian side is preparing ground for large-scale offensive operations, not just in direction of Seversk, not just in direction of Chisov Yar and Konstantinovka, but also in direction of Liman and in direction of Kupiansk and in direction of Kharkov region entirely. So I believe something big is in preparations. Something big is in preparations, and before end of this summer, I believe Russian side will conduct large-scale offensive operations and probably reach Kramatorsk-Slavyansk defense line, which is the last more or less significant defense line that Kiev regime has in this sector of the front. After Kramatorsk-Slavyansk, basically there is no significant defense lines up to the Dnieper River. So let's see if my reading of big picture is correct. In next few weeks, if I am correct, then if in next few weeks we will see significant activization of Russian forces in central and northern parts of the front line. And by the way, Russian side is quite active already, because we all know that during the previous weeks Russian forces managed to conduct quite significant and successful offensive operations in direction of Kupiansk, and they are now in vicinity of Kupiansk. There are some activities in Liman, Yampol Liman direction, also in Kharkov direction. And by the way, maybe Zelensky's regime is worrying that something big is in preparation on Russian side, and possibly to distract Russian forces or to redirect their attention, they become a little bit more active again in this bridgehead right next to Belgorod region during the previous 24 hours, and they are shelling. They began again massively shell some settlements of Belgorod region. And yesterday, many of you probably did see my post on Telegram channel with video and photo materials that confirming that Russian air defense systems did manage to shut down plenty of Ukrainian drones. It was attempt from Zelensky's regime to strike in Belgorod, and the Russian air defense systems did work quite well. And the latest news is that some 10 Ukrainian drones were shut down. So this activity of Zelensky's regime in this area may be attempt from Kiev to somehow distract Russian side and divert attention from these preparations of large-scale offensive operation. But I'm quite sure before end of this summer we will see some significant activity of Russian forces in central and the northern part of the front line. And this is quick summary. This is quick summary for about situation on the front line. During the previous night, Russian side did continue to conduct strikes on military and logistical infrastructure of Zelensky's regime. There were reports about some explosions in Nikolaev region, in Kharkov, in Kryvyi Rog region, in some other areas of Ukraine. And I believe during the day, Russian Defense Ministry will probably share additional information about this, and I will share it on my Telegram. Now let's talk about some other news. And RIA Novosti is reporting here that a Russian group of forces in Zapad did conduct at least 8 sorties during the previous 12 to 24 hours to destroy locations of manpower and ammunition depots and armored vehicles storages of 14th and 103rd brigades of Ukrainian armed forces. This did happen in Kupiansk direction, which does confirms once again that something big is in preparation when it comes to central and northern part of front line. But yet again, this is my reading of picture, and as I said many times, I'm no military expert, and my reading of big picture can be mistaken. But that's news that we have. Russian side did basically neutralize 2 brigades because of these airstrikes and destruction of the ammunition depots and manpower and military equipment, which is extremely important lately for Zelensky's regime, because, as I said, more and more instances when Ukrainian side is Zelensky's regime is sending to the front line infantry without cover of armored vehicles. Let's continue. And this is, by the way, quite interesting news. RIA Novosti is reporting, according to its sources in Russian Defense Ministry, that during the recent strike in Lvov on military and logistical infrastructure of Zelensky's regime, high likely that British Challenger 2 tanks were also destroyed in one of the warehouses in Lvov. So that's RIA Novosti's report, which is based on information on sources in Defense Ministry. And well, even though I did not see photo or video confirmation of destruction of Challenger 2 tanks, I don't think why Defense Ministry, why RIA Novosti's sources will claim such a thing for no reason. So maybe we will learn in coming days, maybe even today, that if not all, at least some Challenger 2 tanks have already been destroyed in Ukraine without them even reaching the front line. That will be interesting. Let's continue. And also RIA Novosti News Agency and many other new media outlets in Russia did report that yesterday afternoon exchange of POWs did take place, and sites did free 45 POWs, which is great news for prisoners of war. They are free now and they can return to their family members. And well, this type, it's good that even though conflict is happening between the sides and it's fierce fighting going on, it's good that some humanitarian lines of communication still are open, and prisoners of war have been exchanged. of course, great news for family members of POWs and friends. Russian soldiers and officers that was taken to medical facilities, and they will undergo rehabilitation process. Next news is reported by TASS, which is based on statements of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who did spoke about PMC Wagner and head of PMC Yevgeny Prigozhin. According to Lukashenko, Prigozhin is not in Belarus right now, and there are some reports that saying that even PMC Wagner units are not presented in Belarus, but to be honest, I find it difficult to believe. In my understanding, at least some capable or very capable units of PMC Wagner already are in Belarus, and they maybe already are training ground forces of Belarusian army. But when it comes to Prigozhin, I don't think it's that important where Prigozhin himself is. I mean, why this is even news, I don't know. But when it comes to PMC, because Prigozhin is the head of PMC, and as long as PMC does all the tasks that it has, then geolocation of Prigozhin, I don't think does play any important role, really. Maybe he is in Belarus, maybe in Russia, maybe in Syria, maybe in one of the countries in African continent. Who knows? I don't think that's truly important. But when it comes to PMC, I'm quite sure some units of PMC are already in Belarus, and maybe they already are training Belarusian army. And you know my take on this story. I believe one of the main tasks for PMC Wagner will be not just training of Belarusian forces, but also to conduct terrorist operations if Poland and Baltic states will send saboteurs through border into the Belarus. So PMC Wagnerites will probably try to neutralize all the possible threats from Poland and Baltic states that are bordering this republic. Let's continue now, and well, this is very, very important news. According to many Russian media outlets, Washington and Pentagon did made up the mind that they did made the decision to supply Zelensky's regime with cluster munition, which is extremely, means very significant step towards extreme escalation between Moscow and Washington. And well, I guess if Washington delivers cluster munition to Zelensky's regime, Moscow will be forced to react on this move very strongly, because I don't think cluster munition can be game changer or will change the tide or reverse the tide, but it's very serious weapons and can be devastating. And well, Moscow don't really have a choice other than react on this and react in significant manner. But yet again, as we did said many times, as we discussed many times, Western elites don't have breaks. They just escalate constantly, and this will probably continue before Russia will force them to stop. That's how it is, really. And by the way, this next news is also very important. As you know, I was saying for many months now that Poland is actively working with support of Washington and London to create anti-Russian coalition in Eastern and Central Europe to conduct military operations in Ukrainian soil, not under the umbrella of NATO, but under the umbrella of this anti-Russian coalition. And well, you know my take on it. I'm quite sure that Western Ukraine, at least Western Ukraine, will become under control of NATO member states. one way or another. But during the previous interview of US military expert Douglas McGregor, we all are familiar with this expert. During his previous recent interview on Judging Freedom channel, we all are familiar also with Andrew Napolitano and his great work. So during this last previous interview, Douglas McGregor did spoke about exactly that. What I was saying for many months, that it's highly likely that Poland and Lithuania, he did mention these two states, will try to establish control over the western regions of Ukraine. So yes, I mean, it's not surprising for us, because we did discuss this possibility of this scenario many times before, for many months. We are not surprised, but when such a level of military expert as Douglas McGregor is saying exactly the same, well, that gives us reassurance that our reading of big picture in our community is maybe not always, but at least quite some time are correct, which is good to know. But when it comes to activity of Poland and Lithuania, I'm quite sure. Let me show you on the map this area. So you know my take on it. I believe Poland will definitely don't act alone. Poland will act together with some level of involvement of Baltic states, not just Lithuania, but Latvia and Estonia also, with some level of involvement or significant level of involvement of Romania also, possibly Slovakia, possibly Czech Republic, because elites of Czech Republic are extremely Russophobic. They are, I mean, they can do computation with in Russophobia with Polish elites. I mean, current Czech elites are just as mad or just as crazy as the Polish elites are, or elites of Baltic states. So that's why I believe Czech Republic also will be involved in this anti-Russian coalition and anti-Russian operations, and maybe a few other states in Eastern and Central Europe. And the only question remains for me personally is, will these states try to establish control only over the western regions of Ukraine, in which case it will be probably possible to avoid direct clashes between Russian forces and forces of these NATO member states, or will they try to establish control over the central regions of Ukraine and southern regions of Ukraine, including Odessa region? Because in this second scenario, I believe it will be almost impossible to avoid direct confrontation between Russian forces and forces of these states, this anti-Russian coalition. Especially when we are talking about Odessa region, because in no circumstances Russian side will allow NATO to establish control over the Odessa region. In no circumstances. Kiev, I don't know. Probably Moscow will try to have a control over the Kiev also, and will give NATO or Western elites or allow them to establish control over the western regions of Ukraine. But yet again, Kiev, I don't know. It all depends how strong Russian positions will be at the moment. But when it comes to Odessa region, no man, there's no circumstances in which Moscow will allow NATO member states to have any control over the Odessa region once this conflict will end. So yet again, time will tell, of course. But well, if Douglas McGregor also is talking about possibility that some NATO member states will enter Western Ukraine, then I guess that's what will happen, because we also did spoke about it many times. Let's continue now, and next news is about, yes, Czech Republic. As I just said, Czech elites are extremely Russophobic. And they made, the Czech government did make a decision, according to TASS news agency's report, that they will deliver to Zelensky's regime military helicopters and ammunition. And Czech elites also did said that they will help Zelensky's regime to train pilots on F-16s. Well, when it comes to Western-made fighter jets, I'm absolutely certain, I'm 100% sure that we will see introduction of Western fighter jets to the battlefield only when this anti-Russian coalition under the leadership of Poland will enter Western Ukraine. They will, of course, try to establish no-fly zone over the western regions of Ukraine that they will try to control. And that's the only time we will see Western fighter jets in the Ukrainian skies. If these forces, if this anti-Russian coalition will try to establish control or establish no-fly zone over the central and southern parts of Ukraine, well, then probably we will also see air-to-air fights between not just ground clashes between ground forces, but also air-to-air combat of Russian fighter jets and fighter jets of these states that will participate in this anti-Russian coalition and occupation of Western Ukraine. But I'm absolutely sure that Zelensky's regime will have no control over the Western-made fighter jets. Never. I just don't see this is happening. I mean, there is no way Zelensky's regime will have its hands on F-16s or Rafales or Swedish, French Rafales or Swedish Saabs or Gripens or any other plane, really. I mean, it's not happening. We all know my take on this topic. I did spoke so many times about all these possible scenarios that, you know. But yet again, yes, Czech Republic is demonstrating its Russophobia, and they are sending or making decision to send military helicopters and ammunition to Zelensky's regime. Of course, it will change nothing overall, but well, relationships between Czech Republic and Russia will definitely be ruined for decades to come. Let's continue. Interfax is reporting that well, US second day in a row are complaining to Russia about activities of Russian fighter jets in Syria, and that's quite strange and I mean, let's say strange topic, because after all, Russian forces have been invited in Syria by legitimate government of that country. US forces are illegally occupying Syrian territory, and by the way, we cannot even compare Syria with Ukraine in terms that I mean, Ukraine was definitely danger for Russian forces. Ukraine in NATO, Ukraine under Nazi regime was clearly danger for Russian Federation, Russian speaker, residents of central and southeastern parts of Ukraine. But when it comes to Syria, and Russia can justify its actions in Ukraine, some may accept this as justification, some may not, but at least Russia has argumentation. When it comes to US presence in Syria, I mean, is they bordering each other? Did Syria pose any even hypothetical threats to US or any NATO member state? No. No. And why US is still present in Syria? It's a question, isn't it? But yet again, I hope Pentagon does realize this, that significant changes has happening on the ground in the Middle East. Syria reestablish diplomatic relationships with the Arab world, Arab states and kingdoms, and Damascus is actively working to reestablish relationships with Ankara, with Turkish government, with Turkey, and with active support of Russia and China also, of course. And well, situation is rapidly changing on the ground. That's too obvious, and hopefully Pentagon will realize these changes and remove its forces from Syria before it's not too late, because at one point, sometime in the future, US bases in Syria may become destruction that should be dealt with. And if Pentagon and Washington won't withdraw the forces from Syria, from northern Syria, they will risk, for no reason, with lives of US military personnel and private contractors that are located right now in northern Syria. So it will be on Washington and Pentagon. But when it comes to activity of Russian aviation in Syria, all that activity is legal and professional, because they have been invited in Syria by government of this country. Let's continue, and this is quite interesting news. Also, today, Zelensky will have a meeting with Erdogan, and according to TASS news agencies, there will be a few topics that sides will discuss, most likely, and one of them, of course, grain deal. Grain deal. Yesterday, Zelensky was in Bulgaria, and he made statements that some, as a result of negotiations, agreements have been reached that that sides will actively work together on some military issues, security issues, and energy topics. Well, Bulgaria may send to Zelensky's regime all the weapons that they have. I mean, it won't change significantly anything or outcome of this conflict, but yet again, Bulgaria already did ruin relationships with Bulgarian leadership. Already did ruin relationships with Russia for decades. I mean, maybe forever. Who knows? And well, today Zelensky is in Turkey, and yes, they will discuss certain topics. Erdogan probably will try to push a peace narrative, because he wants to be in center of attention, and he will probably definitely try to push a topic of peaceful negotiations between the sides, which is not happening. Before Washington and London are against peace, there will be no peace in Ukraine. That's obvious. But of course, Erdogan and Zelensky will also talk about grain deal. This deal was extremely useful for Turkey. It was extremely useful for Zelensky's regime, for some elites in the West. But it was extremely damaging for farmers of Central and Eastern Europe, and it was damaging for Russian Federation, because the Russian part of that grain deal never worked. And on 17th July, this grain deal should be expired, and Russian officials did make quite a few statements that there is no reasons to prolong this deal. But yet again, quite similar statements was made from Russian officials previously, but grain deal did have been prolonged. So it's difficult now to understand what those statements from Russian officials do mean in regard to this grain deal. So it's better to wait and see, because I find it difficult to especially lately, I did find it difficult to understand what those statements of Russian high-ranking officials mean. Especially because, once statements are made, then sometimes exactly opposite is happening, or when statements have been made, there have been no follow-up steps. And we all know how many red lines have been crossed already, and that's why it's not just for me confusing to understand some statements from Russian officials, but probably for all of you and just for everybody in this world, because well, just recently, for example, we all remember Defense Minister of Russian Federation Shoigu did made a statement that Zelensky's regime was planning some strikes deep inside Russian territory in direction of Crimea with Storm Shadow missiles, and if it will happen, Moscow will take out, in response, will take out decision-making centers. Well, after 2 days of that statement, Zelensky's regime did strike bridges that are connecting Crimea and Zaporozhye region. And what? What decision-making centers Shoigu destroyed? None. Or at least I don't know about something. And that's why, and by the way, that's just a recent example. And also a few days ago, the foreign minister of Russian Federation and foreign ministry also officially did stated that there is no that much reasoning for Moscow to prolong these deals. So there was some critical statements made which were supposed to indicate that Moscow won't prolong this deal, but well, as I said, man, I don't know what to believe, and that's why I would not be surprised if, despite this kind of strong statements, grain deal will be prolonged again. Who knows? Who knows, man? Let's. That's what's happening. You know, that's what happens when you are making statements and strong statements about this and that and red lines and so on, and the public did not see follow-up steps. Your statements are deflating. You know, your statements losing meaning. And it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, because one day you may be absolutely serious when you are making statements and no one gonna believe you. And because of it, you know, opponent side make steps which will provoke you to do something, and then world is in trouble. But yet again, you know, who am I to teach high-ranking Russian officials how they should behave? I mean, I'm nobody, isn't it? Okay, let's continue. And RIA Novosti is reporting that Russia will shut down Finnish general consulate in St. Petersburg. Well, relationships between Russia and Finland deteriorating in unbelievable rate recent years and especially recent months. And now Russia is shutting down general consulate of Finland in St. Petersburg. I believe Finnish side will Helsinki will respond in the same way, and one of the Russian consulates will be shut down in Finland. We also had reports, I did read on one of the pages, that Finland will make it much harder for Russian citizens to receive visas in Finland. Well, Russian side will probably respond very same way, and Finnish citizens just won't be able to visit Russia whatsoever. And eventually, well, I guess relationships between the sides will be completely destroyed. And Moscow didn't start this, isn't it? It's Finland that, for some reason, Finnish elites that for some reason decided to, you know, destroy these relationships. And well, that's what we are seeing now. And it's very unfortunate. I mean, Moscow and Helsinki had good working relationships even during the Cold War era. But now, relationships between the sides are probably on the lowest point since the war, since the Second World War. When Finland, by the way, was fighting with Nazi Germany, we should never forget that also. that Finland was an ally of Nazi Germany. So they do have some history that they should be, you know. But anyway, let's continue. Artis, how long is this video? 45 minutes. Okay, just headlines of a few more news. And RT is reporting that Chinese leader Xi Jinping spoke to PLA, People's Liberation Army of China, and he said that readiness of combat readiness of Chinese army should be raised. And basically he spoke about importance of developing of Chinese army, training, how important it is to be able to defeat any enemy that China may encounter. And he was speaking in southern after meeting with the military command responsible for operations in the Taiwan Strait. So it's a southern sector of the PLA, I believe. I don't know designations that they have inside China. And well, of course, Taiwan Strait is and Taiwan itself, and these relationships between Taipei and Beijing are extremely important. And hopefully US won't be able to provoke military conflict between the sides. Hopefully, because if Washington will manage to provoke conflict there, it will be devastating for entire world, really. In every terms, economical, social, infrastructural, just political, geopolitical, in every ways, it will be devastation for the world. Let's continue. And RIA Novosti is reporting that Georgia's ambassador in Ukraine did make statement that diplomatic relationships between Georgia and Ukraine have been downgraded significantly. And as you know, Zelensky demanded from Georgian ambassador to leave Ukraine, basically, for kind of consultations with Tbilisi. Tbilisi is the capital of Georgia. And consultations supposed to be about Mikhail Saakashvili, war criminal and mass murderer that is in Georgian prison. He was a former president of Georgia. And asset of CIA. And I guess Langley demanded from Zelensky to become a little bit more active, to destabilize Georgia and to use the topic of Saakashvili for destabilization. And yes, Zelensky is demanding basically Saakashvili to be freed or to be sent to Ukraine. But current government of Georgia, current leadership is disagree with this, and rightfully so. Saakashvili is a war criminal, mass murderer, and should be in prison before end of his life. It's just too obvious. In no circumstances that criminal should be freed. And by the way, more than that, his associates that are destabilizing Georgia right now and calling themselves opposition leaders, those criminals supposed to be in jail also, forever, for life, because they also are assets of Western secret services, especially CIA, and they are acting under orders of Washington State Department and US Embassy in Georgia. But when it comes to relationships between these two former Soviet republics, Ukraine and Georgia, yes, relationships have been significantly worsened because of unfriendly steps of Zelensky's terrorist and Nazi regime towards Georgia. Let's continue, and by the way, few more topics. So Kommersant newspaper is writing article about situation on the employment and according to surveys, the Russian economy is struggling with because of let me translate this, man. Let me translate this. Lack of workforce. Russian economy is struggling because of with lack of workforce, which is on its own indicator that economy is doing quite well, and unemployment rate is very low. And by the way, this lack of workforce is due to confidence, high level of confidence of Russian companies in internal economical situation. And by the way, 40%, if I'm not mistaken, that's too many numbers here, but I did read this article, and if I'm not mistaken, about 40% of companies are planning to heavily invest in Russia to enlarge their businesses, and to do so they find that it's not that easy because of lack of workforce. And maybe Moscow will be forced in coming months to conduct some negotiations with some states, maybe former Soviet republics, maybe some other countries, to organize some migration process so that Russian economy will have enough manpower, enough workforce to make sure that companies are able to invest in themselves and become more and more successful. But this information, I did share this information. I find it interesting because fact itself that Russian companies are now experiencing this lack of manpower definitely are highlights that economy overall, despite all this pressure from the West and sanctions and so on, are still doing quite well. And that is news, this gonna be last news, that Austrian Raiffeisen Bank did make decision to stay in Russia, at least prolong time before bank will leave Russia, which is, and by the way, right now Raiffeisen Bank, which is Austrian bank, as I understand, it belongs to Austrian some conglomerate, and Italian bank Unicredit are only two Western banks that are still remaining on Russian market. And well, I guess Raiffeisen Bank don't really want to flee Russia, and if they will find any opportunity to stay, they will stay. They will do so. And this is once again highlights how important for many Western companies Russian market was and still are. And Raiffeisen, for example, don't want to ruin great relationships with that they had with Russian partners, and they don't want to leave Russia. But yet again, will Western elites allow them to stay? That's a question. But anyway, this is it for now. I was thinking that update will be short, but it's 55 minutes. Well, I hope you will find this update interesting, and if so, please leave some commentary about any topic you like. Hit that like button. More likes and comments, my videos will have more chances are that YouTube algorithm did not suppress it too much. And if you can, please share links to my videos on my channel with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, or any other platform that you are active on. And if you think this project is interesting, useful, and deserves to exist, please consider to support with small donations through PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or by subscribing to my Patreon page. You will see links under this video in the description box or in the pinned comment. This is it for now. Once again, I wish you a great Friday and wonderful upcoming weekend. Take care.